I am Katie Goen, Marketing Manager at Alert Media, and I'll be your moderator this afternoon. We have a fantastic presentation for you all today. We're going to discuss some lessons learned in 2021, and then talk about how those lessons can help improve business resilience in the year ahead. So to get things started, I will introduce today's speakers. First, we have Bonnie Canal. She is founder and managing partner of the Resiliency Institute. She has more than 12 years of experience in business continuity, disaster recovery, and community resilience, as well as more than 30 years of experience in the IT sector. She is the former national board chair for the Association of Continuity Professionals, and she earned the Master of Business Continuity certification from Disaster Recovery Institute International. She is a proud New Orleans native, as you can probably see from her posters behind her. And she has experienced many disasters in that time, like all the hurricanes, Katrina, Rita, Ike, Gustav, Laura, Ida, as well as the BP oil spill firsthand. So she really knows her stuff. And she helps business leaders define and understand risks and vulnerabilities and empowers them with systems and knowledge that protect the employees, the customers, and the stakeholders. Hi, Bonnie, welcome.
Hey, Katie, thanks for having me today. Thanks to you, Bob, as well.
Certainly glad you're here. And I'd also like to take a moment to introduce Peter Steinfeld. Peter has been involved in the emergency communications industry for more than 20 years. He is the Senior Vice President of Safety Solutions at Alert Media, where he works closely with a wide range of organizations to support their business continuity, emergency preparedness, and employee safety initiatives. He's also the host of the Employee Safety Podcast here at Alert Media, and he's had recent conversations with leaders from FEMA, Salesforce, Boeing, and many other organizations. And he actually interviewed Miss Bonnie Canal on the show last week. So he was talking with her about the importance of investing in people and why that's good business. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, you'll definitely want to check out that episode. Hi, Peter. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today, and I'm looking forward to it.
I am too. Well, let's get into it. I want to just first go over the agenda. We're going to discuss some lessons learned from 2021. We're going to talk about some steps you can take to help your organization achieve preparedness in 2022. We'll discuss a few guiding principles for business resiliency. And then finally, we'll talk about some best practices for how to build a resilient infrastructure. But before we get into the presentation, I do want to launch our first poll. So I do encourage you to participate in all the polls throughout the webinar today. It is going to help us gain context on our audience, but it'll also help us direct the conversation today as well. So if you could please take a moment to answer the question on your screen, which is, how prepared is your organization currently to navigate emergencies and other critical events in 2022? So do you feel extremely prepared, prepared, unsure, unprepared, or extremely unprepared? So I'm going to give that just a few more seconds if you could go ahead and submit your answer. And then Bob, when you're ready, if you wouldn't mind just ending the poll and then sharing the results so that we can all have a look, that would be great.
Oh.
Wow,
Great.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So it looks like, most of our folks feel prepared, which seems great to me, but let me ask you, Bonnie, is that about what you were expecting?
I don't know, Katie, I always find that answer very fascinating. I think we think we're prepared, and I think it's human nature to believe we're prepared, but I think what we've learned over the last couple of years is no matter how prepared we think we are, there's always something that can go wrong. And I always talk about plans always fail at the human level, and since humans are, quite interesting folks, I think, I think that, I like to look at us as unsure to prepared is where I like to see us.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Peter?
Yeah, I would say that it's kind of like when I talk to a lot of folks, they say when you're preparing for a hurricane and you think it's going to be a Cat 3, prepare for a Cat 4. So when you think about, are you prepared? you could internally think you're prepared, but knock yourself down one notch, go the opposite direction just to be safe, because complacency really can be a killer. So yeah, that's interesting feedback though.
Yeah, absolutely. Both good points there. Well, I am going to go ahead and turn things over to Peter and Bonnie, who are going to discuss some lessons learned from 2021. So Peter, do you want to kick things off for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Katie. So it's been nearly 2 years since the COVID-19 pandemic began, which is just hard to believe. And businesses are really still feeling its impact in a lot of different ways. Leadership teams just trying to make informed decisions on how to manage these lasting effects while still protecting their people, their customers, and their stakeholders. And a prime example is paradigm shifts in the workforce. So many employees are now working remotely or on some kind of hybrid plan, which means that employers must protect their people and effectively communicate with them wherever they are, not just at the office like before, or at company facilities. And those remote workers may be what we are now calling anywhere workers, who could decide to travel to a different location or just to work for a period of time somewhere new. So they're kind of hopping around. You're not quite sure where they are at any given time. There's also a shift in the values of the current workforce. That's a really big one. Many employees are leaving their jobs for organizations that offer more flexibility, increased compensation, better perks, or stronger work-life balance. That's the big one I've seen a lot lately. This has commonly been referred to as the, quote, great resignation in the media. New data from the analytics firm Vizier found that at least 1 in 4 people, so I mean, that's a big number, quit their jobs in 2021. So Bonnie, with that in mind, what changes are organizations making to address these types of workforce shifts?
Peter, and I really think about that 1 in 4, 1 in 5. I've seen a lot of different numbers with that, where folks are really leaving, or they're really starting to think a lot about, as you said, the value. What is the value of me going to work? And I do think that the other side of this, those that are working from home, while it's enjoyable to work from home, as you can probably see, I'm in my own home, it's great. But the challenges of that are the work-life balance. What I really see is that some folks have to go to work earlier and stay at work later simply because they're working at home. They don't have the opportunity to get the breaks that they used to have, go stand around the water fountain, so to speak, and have a conversation. So I think that organizations really have to start looking at their people as opposed to their processes. How can the people really start to handle the processes? I really look at you have a job description. Here's my job description. These are the things that I do, as opposed to these are the tasks that need to be done, or these are the things that need to be done within our work environment. Who can do that at their best? Like, who is the better suited person to do this? And I think with a bifurcated workforce, that really kind of changes the way that organizations need to look at not only the structure of their organization, but their workflows and their processes within that, to allow people to kind of self-select into their strengths and then self-select out of their weaknesses. And that allows all people to step up and really kind of make a difference as we move forward to 2022.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's great. Well, another big issue is over, I would say, pretty much the second half of 2021 is the supply chain disruptions that we've been seeing. They've just dominated headlines for the past several months and have been quite challenging for a whole lot of businesses out there, really across the board. I think it was CBS News, they called it an everything shortage, which seems to be right. I've heard of restaurants simply saying, hey, we can't make this dish today because we don't have onions. I mean, it's really that extensive. From oil, gas, and other fuel shortages to microchips and food items like the onion example I just gave, even to automobiles. We've gone from what really is a just-in-time supply chain to one that's just filled with back orders, out of stock notices, and shipping delays. Adobe, they recently released their first set of online shopping data for the 2021 holiday season. And so far, shoppers have already experienced over 2 billion, not million, 2 billion out of stock messages, which is incredible. Retail experts are also predicting that holiday sales for 2021 are expected to increase approximately about 8.5% to 10.5% over the previous year. And all of this really represents a whole lot more pressure on businesses to manage inventory, ensure staffing is sufficient, and then continue to provide great service to customers. So Bonnie, again, with that in mind, what's your take on all this supply-mageddon as we move into 2022?
You know, I chuckle because, as anyone knows, my little brother works, my younger brother, he's not little than me, but he works for Chrysler. And it's one of these challenges that they've had with the automobile industry is being able to meet the demand. And it's not that the factories can't produce enough cars, they don't have enough chips to put in the cars. And so it's one of those where I love to buy a car, I really would, but I'm not going to pay $10,000 over cost, dealer cost or dealer price, sticker price for a car. I'm just not going to do it. I don't have to have one, let someone else do that. And I think you hit the nail on the head with this idea of just-in-time supply chain. And that's really kind of how organizations really kind of cut their fat, so to speak, you know, to run it as lean as possible. I mean, that's what the stockholders expect is a return on their investment. So they want to see their stock prices rise. And what you need to really do is figure out where's some fat that we can cut. And that is really where you see in the supply chain is people just don't simply have it. The other part of that is obviously we don't make things in the United States anymore. And that's neither good nor bad, it's just a simple fact. And so really the idea when you're looking at chips, to start a chip manufacturing plant in the United States is billions of dollars. So you start looking at this and saying, we have to kind of rethink this in terms of whether we may not be able to control the global supply chain. From an organization, what do we need to do? Can we have some extra pieces and parts that we need? Can we look at our clients or our customers and how can we substitute what we have? I think that as we look forward, we really need to start to be a lot more creative. Instead of looking at this and saying, you know, a blow and go, like, oh, we learned our lessons, let's move on for this. What can we do long-term lasting as we move forward in this and saying, if we ever see something like this again, how can we protect ourselves against this? And the one thing that I would be extremely remiss in not talking about supply chain is the supply chain of talent, otherwise known as people. And we talked about in the slide before, you know, the turnover of individuals. I mean, if you lose somebody that's been with your organization 5, 6, 7, 20 years, the cost for that is astronomical. The replacement of that knowledge base, that institutional knowledge that person has, really affects the bottom line of an organization that may not be able to be measured. So when you're looking at supply chain, always consider your talent and what can we do to keep our talent in line, and then always building talent as we're moving forward as well.
Yeah, excellent advice. Well, moving on to a topic that I know that is near and dear to your heart, Bonnie, weather, severe weather at that. As we've all experienced in some fashion or another, natural disasters and severe weather events continue to increase in number, severity as well, and the extent of impact. There's just a lot more people living in high-risk areas than ever before. And as we just talked about, our increasingly just-in-time business infrastructure is incredibly susceptible to any disruptions. Fat can be a good thing. Sometimes you need it to help you get through these times. Any issues that happen are just magnified way more than ever before. We saw another above average hurricane season this year. Parts of the country have seen record amounts of rainfall and flooding. In the Western US, so out in California, that area, they experienced the worst wildfire conditions ever on record in 2021. And all of that on top of the pandemic. So organizations have had to be prepared for all those events and more, not to mention what's still coming, the winter weather season that's now upon us. According to the World Economic Forum's 2021 Global Risks Report, extreme weather ranks among the highest likelihood of risks that are facing organizations for basically the next 10 years or so, they're thinking. So Bonnie, with that in mind, how can organizations really make heads or tails of this now and in the immediate future?
You know, Peter, I chuckle at this. You know, we had 21 named storms this year of hurricanes. It was the third most in modern history. I spent the last storm, Hurricane Ida, in my closet while we had Category 4 winds pass over us. And so, you know, we were totally fine, not worried about it. But, you know, it is an adventure for 8 hours of constant wind. But I think that really for an organization, obviously it's something that you can be planful about and really start to recognize how it affects us all the way across the board. And I'll give a great example, and then I'm going to go back to the people, because I really think that we do mitigate against extreme weather as best that we can. I mean, there's nothing you can do. If you're in the middle, like what we're seeing in Hawaii right now, it's snowing in some parts and you're flooding in other parts. I mean, there's really not a whole lot you can do about that except hunker down, and then hopefully, you know, your government is able to respond in the appropriate way, and then you'll have your plans obviously to start that. But this idea is that I have a client that has a plant upriver here in Louisiana, and after the storm, they were able to get their plant up and running within 3 days. They were very, very excited about this. However, the challenge was that the people that were getting their plant up and running didn't have a home. And so this idea is that if I'm having to take care of my family or my job, which am I going to choose? And so I really think that we're starting to look at our extreme weather or any of these conditions that we find ourselves in to really start to incorporate our people into our plans and to really understand that, again, and it really turned out to be a problem because while they got their plan up and running, they weren't able to come in on day 6. They weren't able to come in on day 8, simply because they had things they had to take care of at home. So these are the kind of things that, as we're looking forward, is what can we do to support our employees? What can we do? Do they need, FEMA's going to show up, when they show up, right? Is there something we can supply to them in the immediacy? What can we do to really help our families out or, our employees' families out after these major disasters? Because they're going to happen more and more and more. People go to work for money. And if they really need to feel supported, and that's another reason why people will stay, is that they look at our organization or our company and say they're going to really help us. So I think in terms to making a plan, most organizations can be planful as opposed to their structures and things like that. But I think a lot of times they forget about how it affects an individual, me, my family, what is required of me, and what do I have to do tomorrow, day after tomorrow, and the day after that.
Yeah, I think a really good way to look at it is based on what you said. Anytime you're thinking about your business continuity planning, think, how does it affect the company? How does it affect my people's ability to do their jobs? And how does it affect them personally? Right. And really, ultimately, that personal thing is going to control everything else. You could have someone who can do their work still, company can still function, but their home, total loss. So they're not concentrating on the other two at all.
Right. And we saw that a lot. We saw a lot about that with Katrina. Where people, we saw that with the police force, where they just simply couldn't respond anymore. I mean, they did it for months, and they were too tired. So I think, again, that's something that an organization can really drive home, is to really look at this and say, what do we need to do for our people? And that's where you get HR involved. You have these policies, you have these procedures, you have all of these different things. There could be funds that could be available, emergency funds that are available for these folks. So again, there's a lot of creativity that can be done to look at extreme weather.
Yeah, it's good for business because if you can get your people back up and running, they can help the business. So
that's exactly right.
Well, the last category that we're going to cover in this section is civil unrest, which is undoubtedly on the rise. Over the past 40 years, the number of public demonstrations and protests have really increased. It's like a staggering 230%, according to the 2021 Global Peace Index. We dug through their data, and through it, what we saw was they've calculated that the world is, this seems like a small number, 0.07% less peaceful than it was last year. Which may not sound like a lot, but it's the 9th deterioration in peacefulness in the last 13 years. And that's really the big news headline there. So civil unrest can be a major threat to organizations of really all sizes and industries, particularly those that have brick and mortar locations in urban areas where organized demonstrations are most likely to occur. So Bonnie, with that in mind, what are your thoughts on what organizations can expect in this area moving forward?
Peter, it's really interesting. Again, I have another client who was talking about this to me. They have a brick and mortar location in New York City, and one of the things they were concerned about were these peaceful protests that we saw last year. And so again, it was, how do we get our gates, or how do we close our windows to make sure people can't get through? And I think part of that is really understanding, and I say this a lot, I feel very strongly that the violence that we're seeing, or this feeling of that we're all feeling, has a lot to do with COVID, right? We're all trapped. You can't do what you used to do. You want to go here, you can't go here. Wait, now I need to wear a mask. Do I not wear a mask? What do I do? What I can, so there's a lot of pressure that's on the individual right now, which I think we're starting to see in the general angst of folks. And so I think that an organization needs to kind of really factor this in and really start to think about not just protests or civil unrest, but how this is affecting us as individuals. I mean, all of us, I always say this, when Michelle Obama said she was depressed, it gave us all a right to feel depressed, right? Michelle Obama's depressed, so I could be depressed too. So I think part of understanding the civil and the civil unrest and the protests is really understanding what's going on with humans today. And it's across the world in a global pandemic. And I think this is something that we haven't really thought about, I think, from an organizational perspective. We all know we need to show up with mental health people, after a major disaster in a community. So you have a major tornado, you're bringing in your mental health to talk to your employees. Could we consider this for COVID? I think we should. We're starting to see people are getting more and more agitated. You can't drive down the road anymore without people honking at you, or in some cases in my city, they'll just shoot you. So I think that this idea of understanding where we are is to say, we're in a situation now where people are coming at this very agitated. We never stop, right? It's never off. We never get to turn it off. It's always something. And it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And I think from an organizational perspective, to acknowledge this and really start to make fundamental changes in how we view, again, our individuals. I mean, people are going to show up with their stuff, all of it. And we pay for all of it, whether we want it or not. So to leave that at home doesn't really happen. So again, to really think through what's going on, what's causing this. And I think that's really the conversation of 2022, is starting to pull these pieces apart and really start to understand them in a different perspective.
Yeah, it really comes back to people. Like you've been saying, everything you do in your business continuity and disaster recovery planning should really start with people first, and then everything else will flow from there.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thanks for those insights. Very much appreciated. Without a doubt, it's certainly helpful to reflect on what we've learned this year to help us prepare for 2022 and what is to come. So, Katie, I'll turn it back over to you for the next audience poll.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. This is actually a great time to poll the audience again. So if you could please just take a moment to fill out the question on your screen. And this time we're asking, which of the threats that we just discussed is the biggest concern for your organization? So is it the workforce and the labor shortages we talked about, the severe weather and natural disasters, maybe the supply chain disruptions, or the civil unrests and protests?
I bet everybody wants to be able to select more than one.
I know, the biggest concern. Yeah, so Bob, when you're ready, you can go ahead and end that poll and share the results if you would.
Wow.
Interesting.
Well, wow. So pretty even for the top two there, but of course, all of these are concerns. So let me ask you, Bonnie, is that what you were thinking based on the conversation so far?
I was really thinking that supply chain would pop up a little more, but I'm happy to see, obviously, that people are looking at what I always consider the top two, workforce labor. I think it's going to be the next, as we, not only through this, but as we look forward, as we continue to move forward, our industry needs to get younger. And so again, we look at our industry and say, how can we bring these younger folks into this? So, and I think that's where you'll see a workforce shortage or labor gaps as we move forward. So I think it's very exciting to see at least people beginning to address this.
And what about you, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, if you looked at this 2 years ago, it would have been 90% severe weather, natural disasters, and very little on the rest. So this is very interesting that it's just changing times.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for participating in the poll. And Bonnie, I'm going to turn it back over to you now so you can talk about the 10 steps to preparedness in 2022.
Thanks, Katie. And the thing that I want to go through really quickly with all of these is the thing to look at as we go through each and every step. Everyone knows these steps. It's the same steps we do over and over again. So I want you to really think about this and what can we do differently? I think that has to be the thing that we have to look at for 2022. Let's not go through do the same things we've already done. We know what that outcome is. So when you're talking about assessing your risk, do a different risk assessment, do a risk assessment in a different way. Look at it from a different perspective. How do we look at things differently for 2022 based on the information we have from 2021? How do we move forward in assessing our business, our critical business functions? Those have changed. In number two, those have changed exponentially because of what we've seen with COVID. So what you see is the way we work is so different now. How has that affected us? Has our critical business functions moved in a different way, or they're in different processes? How has this moved forward in a way or changed exponentially after this from COVID? And will it stay? You know, because what we're starting to see is the shift has happened, and why we say, well, it's because of COVID. Is it going to be here in 2025? The answer is Probably. So the next thing we look at is to prepare your supply chain, right? And you're looking at this, and we talked about this earlier, but really to examine your supply chain and look at this and saying, how do all the pieces and parts get here? What do we do? Let's do a parts explosion and really start to understand our supply chain and really get to know our suppliers. We're only as good as our suppliers, right? And so that means that I want to have that, what I always tell everybody, with all things being equal, I want to be a little more equal. So again, part of that is understanding the supply chain. When I'm on the phone, I want them to answer my phone, right? So that's really what I look at for there. And then you look at number 4, the create an emergency management plan. That's not a business continuity plan. That's an emergency management plan. And that's really something completely different. Is that I always talk about this. How many people do you think know how to get out of a burning building? Everybody? I can tell you story after story after story where I know I've been there. People can't figure out how to get out of a burning building. So this idea is, what do I do in case of? What do I need to do? And do we train on that? Do people really understand what an emergency management plan is? What do I need to do? The less I have to think, the more that I intuitively know, the better we are. So again, we look at our emergency management plan. We had to talk about this with COVID. You know, mask, plastic, hands, you know, washing, all of this stuff. How is this going to be incorporated as we move forward? We all know that COVID's not going away. It's going to be with us for the rest of our lives. So how is COVID going to impact us as we move forward? We may not die from it based on the vaccines, but we may continue to get sick. But how is that going to be incorporated into our emergency plan as we move forward? Again, active shooters, all of these things that we know about, we really need to look at this and saying, what do our employees absolutely positively know what to do in case of an emergency? And then as we look at number 5, it's backing up your data. It's not, of course, you know, I always say this, I've spent my whole life in IT industry. It has not changed. Back up your data and keep it safe, right? That's all it ever is. That's all it ever is. However, when you're looking at cybersecurity, you're looking at all of these issues, your backup may be corrupted. You may have malware there. So what are you going to do with that? So this idea of backing up your data is really thinking through malware, phishing, all of these different things. When you're backing up your data, how secure is that data? And how long is it going to take to you to recover? And again, I'm in the cybersecurity class right now. And what happens if you don't have your data for 30 days? Or what happens if the data that you do get is 30 days old? I don't know about you, but 30-day-old data is not good for me, right? So these are the kind of things when you're looking forward and saying, these are the issues that are coming up that are really going to be different as we move forward. Backing up your data and keeping it safe means something completely different in 2022 than it did in 1992, right? So again, thinking through how this works. Obviously, a crisis communication plan is really important, and always to be able to communicate up and down the food chain and laterally. Employees need to know what it is that's expected of them. Again, I have another client who is in Texas, works for a hospital in Texas, and the thing that was really, as we know, we had some challenges in Texas with the grid and electricity, kind of important. But one of the things that they were working on was who needed to come to work, who needed to stay home, right? And so they were able to email or send out text messages. They weren't emailing, sending text messages, come, stay. They also sent out, what the hospital did is they acquired several plumbers. And so, because that was the big thing, nobody could find a plumber. And so because people couldn't go to work, there was water coming through their ceilings, they were able to call and get information on how to get a plumber to their house so they can return to work faster. So again, there's a lot of creative ideas you can come up with how to use your crisis communication plan to really be able to communicate with folks that really need the information. And obviously planning beforehand makes good sense. And I know we'll talk about that obviously a little bit later. But again, an emergency kit, we talk about that a lot. I mean, again, what does that look like for your facility? What do you need there? I've been to a facility in New Hampshire that at every door and in every bathroom, they had a little kit. They were a mini manufacturing plant that had a lot of slivers of metal everywhere. Well, they had eye wash. And there was instructions. I mean, it was amazing what they did. But again, this idea of an emergency kit based on what someone not only who works there, but who comes in there could be exposed to. Make sure you have these things. These are the kind of things we tend to walk by, say, yeah, I got a first aid kit. But is that enough? Is that really going to cover everything we need to talk to or need to address. And number 8, we look at review your insurance coverage. Again, insurance is the way that we always mitigate, right? We mitigate our losses against insurance. Lessons learned always with insurance. They're not always quick to pay up, right? It takes a little bit of time to get this money. So you really need to review your policies and know very clear what is covered and more importantly, what isn't covered. I always say this, don't let your broker tell you what's in there. Read what's in there. Again, and depending on your size of your organization, yeah, my broker says, you know, what's going to happen? Your adjuster comes out and they're going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about, lady. This is what's in there. So again, always reevaluate and see how you can transfer risk or mitigate risk through your insurance policy. And again, that should be done at least annually. Sit down with your insurance agent, your broker, and really, really have these conversations. Make sure you can back up everything, photos, anything you have, all of that for insurance needs to be documented as well. And then obviously, as we look at an alternate location in number 9, that's really kind of changed a lot, hasn't it? I mean, what we saw was it used to be you would go to a different place or you'd go to a place that was different within your campus. Now this alternate location has turned into somebody's home, right? Now you're working from home. So what does that look like? How has that affected your cybersecurity issues? I mean, we had a rush to get all of this stuff out. So now we have this alternate location where people are dispersed all along the region. How has that affected our network? What about our cybersecurity? So when you're looking for alternate locations or talking about this, we're already there. So let's come back and look at this and say, why we hurried up and got everybody up and running, how has that affected us? How has that affected us from a location perspective? And the other side of this is, are we even going back? I mean, that's the real issue is, are we going to return back to work? And if we do, what does that look like? So again, if you had 5 floors in an office building, are you going back? You know, and or are you going to have the little pens where everybody sits in? So these are the kind of discussions as we're looking forward to 2022, where alternate locations really start to migrate. Then obviously the last one is, you know, test, practice, drill. I mean, goodness gracious. If you don't know how you're going to be able to handle a situation unless you look for challenges. And I always say this, and I'll be really quick, is that we're always testing for failure, aren't we? When you're setting up a test, you've got to be very clear to the powers that be is that we're looking for failure. We're not testing so like, yes, check, we've done this and we're really happy. The more we fail, the better we are. Obviously, they need to be realistic. Obviously, they need to be doable. But again, you are testing for failure. We're looking for opportunities for improvement, and that's really what we need to do. So these 10 steps of preparedness, we all know them. We've all heard them. We all do them. I encourage you to look forward in 2020, to step back from where we are and to look forward in 2020 and say, what can we do differently? Let's change our eyes a little bit different. Let's change our perspective a little bit differently and really drill into this and say, let's see how we can be better at what we do in 2022. Oh, that rhymes.
That's great, Bonnie. Yeah, great job.
Great, Marquette.
Well, now that we've gone over the best ways that organizations can prepare, what can you tell the audience about how to create a business resiliency infrastructure at their organization?
And Katie, as we go through this, I mean, again, everyone knows this, everyone's seen this, you know, risk assessment, the personal risk assessment, I mean, dependencies, I mean, all of these things. Again, we all know this. It's to really look at this from a different perspective. The reason why in what I put in there is the personal risk analysis, the personal risk assessment, but because again, if Bob is the one that's required to do something and Bob doesn't show up, then what? You know, so this idea of really kind of looking at things and really looking at things I always look at it at the 4th dimensional level. Like, how can we look at it from all different ways and really kind of examine this and say, not just trying to fit this and try to make all of these things fit in a box. Let's really start to pull these apart and start to have conversations about this is what we've done. This is what we found. This is what our suppliers or our competitors are doing. Can we do this? Should we do this? So I think a conversation around these models need to happen, not just the planning part of it. You know, the plan is the plan, but really what we're trying to do is expound on this, because I think, again, COVID's changed everything. It's changed everything. And if we don't plan and look at things differently, then we're going to be exactly where we are today. And unfortunately, next year, and unfortunately for some organization means they won't be here. So that's really what this is about, is that a business's role is to stay in business, right? I mean, that's, that's kind of what businesses do. Our job is to help ensure the success of our organization collectively, is through the wholeness. And that's what resiliency planning is to really, how do we make our business become stronger? As they say, bigger, stronger, faster.
Mm-hmm.
So again, not about the plans. Again, all plans fail at human level. People support what they create. I cannot tell you enough is that I'm not writing your plan. You write it, you own it. It's not the same as disaster recovery. I hear this all the time. DR is data. Hello, it's data. And you need a separate plan for that. You also need a separate plan for cybersecurity. Your DR folks are not really cybersecurity people. They're there to work on processes, applications, data as a collective. Cybersecurity is doing something completely else. So you have to really think about things and have 3 different people looking at the same problem. Again, recognize the government can't do it all. I say this all the time after disaster. You hear this all the time. A quick story. My mom was on the phone with me. This was after a storm several years ago. She wanted to know where FEMA was. Where's FEMA, Bonnie? Where's FEMA? Why isn't FEMA here? And I say, Mama, it's not like, you can open a door, throw water, and FEMA just runs out, right? There's no little gremlins in there. The idea is that the government is a big process and it takes time. So to look to the government and expect them to do certain things, it's not going to happen. So we as businesses need to kind of lead this way and be the part of the public-private partnership. We need to play our role in that. And again, you have to look at things that are non-measurable or things that we don't know. I mean, you have to really kind of think about this. The one thing I always say in the classes that I teach is that I never want someone to come up to me and say, I never thought of it. Our role is to think of all the terrible things that are going to happen to you. I mean, I tell everybody this all the time. My job is to walk into your organization, tell you 10,000 ways you're going to die, and you will like me by the time I leave, right? But that's our job. Our job is to think through. So you don't want to say, I'm not creative enough. Our role is to really be creative and start to look at these things. We may not be able to address them, but at least we can say we were aware of them. And there's nothing worse than saying, I had no idea this could happen.
Right.
So again, these are the benefits, and these are the things that if we don't know this by now, we're in a hard way, right? But a mitigation of loss of life. I mean, we know that. But look at this and go through this: external relationships, supply chain resilience, minimizing the impact of businesses. These are the things of why we need to do this. And again, the reason why we do it is because good, well-run organizations do this. Again, we're not just in the business to make money. We're in business to making money and keeping it, right? Mm-hmm. So again, you don't just make money. Oh, look at all this money and it goes out the back door. What we do is helping our organizations keep their money. So why we do what we do is we mitigate. We do everything we can to help our organization not trip and fall, not stumble over the things, not wander into black holes and not knowing why we're even here. I mean, this idea is we plan because if we know what, or we can see part of what's coming, we can mitigate the impact on us to the best of our ability. The idea is not to always be able to take a punch. Can you take a punch? It's can you get up? We're all going to take a punch. It doesn't matter. It's coming. It's not if, it's when. So the idea behind resiliency is how do we get up again? And the idea is if we build it strong enough, how far we have to rise after it becomes less and less and less.
Absolutely. Well, Peter, I think you had some best practices you wanted to go over.
Yeah, just a few things here to round it out. Bonnie, that was great. Thank you so much. And now communication is what I'm really passionate about. Why? Well, because I always say this, nothing ever goes 100% according to plan in an emergency. If you can't communicate, you can't recover. You actually have to sit and observe what's actually happening on the ground when the disaster is going on, call audibles, and then quickly communicate that messaging to the right constituents at the right time. So to assist with that, what I really highly recommend is that you invest in a modern mass communication system. And you can see on the screen here some of the features that are really essential to include. Number one is two-way messaging, because it's really critical to obtain feedback from the field to understand who's actually reading your messages, as well as be able to ask questions about their health, their status, their ability to be productive, or their need for assistance, so you can direct it to them very quickly. Multi-channel notifications are really crucial because you never know which channels are right for a given person at a given time during an emergency. Send messages on at least 2 channels and more if possible, such as email, text, phone calls, mobile app pushes, computer pop-ups, chat clients like Slack and Teams. Leverage everything you got. And then having integrated access to threat intelligence and monitoring, I believe, is really crucial these days. The earlier you can be alerted to possible trouble and then communicate about those things to those who are impacted, the better your outcomes can potentially be. It's always better to be 2 steps ahead of things. I think everyone would agree with that. Another thing that can be really valuable, you should look into this, is not to direct all your communications through outbound pushing, but have some kind of web-based event pages that provide people with private access to additional information about the situation as it continues to unfold. It can be really helpful. You can update these pages, essentially sharing the latest information about what's going on without having to constantly send them push notifications. And that's important because if you send too many messages, people get what's called notification fatigue and they start to ignore them. So let them digest the information in a way that makes sense for them. And then lastly here on this one, surveys and reporting can be very helpful. I mentioned it earlier, but being able to survey your audience in real time to understand their situation can really help you direct the right resources to where they need to be as quickly as possible. And then as you'll see on the next slide, we always recommend don't try to go it alone. I really encourage you to lean on your network or your peers at similar organizations to learn about and benefit from their business resiliency efforts. No safety leader really should operate in a vacuum. So what are they doing that's successful? Can they offer you perhaps a new perspective? Get out of your bubble a little bit. Perhaps you can learn from their challenges and solutions while they learn from yours. Also, I recommend just overall engaging your community, your current vendors. Never pass up an opportunity to meet with people who are like-minded individuals to learn from them, discuss thoughts, share ideas. And then finally, this is a big one, and I've learned this on the podcast. I hear it all the time from law enforcement folks. Introduce yourself to local law enforcement and emergency responders. They can and absolutely should be involved in your planning and maybe even in your drills and your trainings. You'll want to form these relationships ahead of time, not during the crisis or emergency. As someone very wise once told me, you don't want to be trading business cards in the middle of a crisis. All right, well, with that said, let's start thinking ahead to 2022. So to summarize, to achieve business resiliency, companies really must protect their employees, stakeholders, their data, their assets, and their physical locations that they have all over the place. And it's not just the old offices, it's all the homes that people are trying to work out of these days. And in 2021, I would say, well, 2022, it's going to continue to be as challenging as it was in 2021 in the year ahead, due to the concurrence of all the threats that are facing organizations, really of all sizes and industries. When you think about how to protect your business, ask yourself questions like these. So what are our expectations for the coming year? And how does our resiliency plan actually support business goals? To better protect your people, ask yourselves, how can we better safeguard our people, both in the office and those who are remote? And how equipped are we to basically monitor the threats and respond to the emergencies that are occurring all around this highly distributed workforce? Business continuity and resiliency really go hand in hand. So remember to regularly ask questions like, what could go wrong? And what do we have as far as a plan to address it? Like Bonnie was saying, get really creative and think of all the things that could go wrong. And then what can we do today to better prepare for whatever comes next? And then finally here, it's really important to be improving constantly. Ask yourselves, what lessons can we apply from 2021? And how do we avoid complacency when things seem to get better? Because I said it before, but complacency can be a real killer. Always say, yeah, I think we're here, but knock it down a notch and challenge yourself and think you're not quite there yet. All right, with that in mind, Katie, I'll go ahead and hand it back to you.
Thank you, Peter and Bonnie. Great insights there. So before we do get to some audience questions, I just have one final poll for our audience. So if you could just take a minute to answer this final question, which is, are you interested in learning more about how alert media can help you improve business resiliency in 2022? So you can answer yes, and we will happily follow up with you to make sure you have all the information that you need, or you can say not at this time. So if you could just take a quick moment, we'll go ahead and finish this one up. And we can move on to some questions whenever you are ready, Bob. We can end this one. Perfect. So we do have a few minutes left to answer some questions. So if you haven't already submitted yours, please feel free to use the questions box and we can go from there. So let's see. Bonnie, here's one for you. Let me start there. What is the best way to measure the success of our business resilience efforts?
I think to measure success is to really look at and re-examine our plans and see what's really happened, right? And to really do some measurable, something that's tangible and measurable, to come back at this and saying, what have we done? And really kind of measure it against the overall goals and goals that we set out in the beginning. So part of this is looking through and saying, okay, we've managed to do this, we've managed to do that. What are the things we had to put aside? And I think that's when we're talking about the continuous improvement that Peter was talking about, is to really kind of see where we are and what we've done. And again, I always like to say, you want to stop and celebrate the things you've done well. And then, I mean, because more often than not, I mean, this is constant. It's always, I mean, I tell people all the time, the work we do is exhausting. And I mean, it's mentally and emotionally exhausting, especially we spend a lot of time on planning, so an enormous time on planning. But when something actually happens, that's what the back half of the plan is all about, so make sure that we planned right. So again, when we're actually implementing, it actually works. So I think, again, looking through the things we've done right, really celebrating that, and they continue to move forward and look at things that we've put aside. But again, stopping and celebrating the efforts that have been done over this year, the last few years. And I think a lot of times people just miss that. It's like, you did a great job this year. Thanks, team.
Absolutely. Well, this is a great question coming in for both of you, but Bonnie, I'll probably have you answer first, if that's okay. It says, the presenter made a good point about getting a new generation involved in our field. What do both presenters see as opportunities to do that? Maybe leveraging the most recent events to include younger colleagues?
So, and thanks for asking that question. I do a lot of work here in New Orleans with our Tulane students. I go, there's a Disaster Resilience Leadership Academy here at Tulane, and I'm always asked to go in and talk about the difference between the public and private sector, emergency management versus business continuity. And more often than not, the younger folks, and again, I'm a woman of a certain age with gray hair, right, who kind of grew up, was born in the 60s. So I'm a little bit older, right? And these are my grandkids' age, right? So my point in saying this is that they want to do that, what they would call sexy. Being that person on the front line is really sexy. But there's not a lot of jobs in emergency management. There just isn't. And so, but in business continuity, we kind of have a bad reputation. It's kind of being, it's my words, right? Working for the man. They don't want to work for the man because it's the man. So the idea is what can we do to really show our younger folks how to get involved at a younger age? So one of the programs that we're starting to initiate here through a nonprofit, which I'm board chair of here in New Orleans, is let's show kids how emergency management, business continuity affects their lives in a daily way. So let's talk about building of levees. Let's talk about 5G. So you can talk about this to high schoolers and get them to say, what does it take to build a levee? What does it take to build a bridge? What does it take to mitigate against a storm surge of 10 feet? What does that look like? Now what you're starting to get is kids can understand this and they bring it home with them because they can see it and they understand this. And so again, the idea is to start younger and to move it through, but again, reaching through our universities and allowing our universities to partner either with your organization, your business, or anything within your community to really allow them the opportunity to see the work we do because it's important.
Mm-hmm. And Peter, what about you? And just to remind you of the question, what do you see as an opportunity to include younger generations and get them involved in the field?
I would echo everything that Bonnie just said, not a lot to add to it other than just to emphasize, I think back to when I was young, like I had no idea that this even existed. When you're a kid, you think, I think when I was interested in, I could be an astronaut, a cartoonist, a baseball player, and a doctor. That was like the limit of my imagination. So you have to go out and educate, outreach, let people know that this exists, tell them about all the different things that you can get into, from literally being the first responder, like a fireman, a police officer, to all the things that Bonnie has done over her career and everything in between. it is a very rich environment, and they just need to be educated on it.
Gotcha. And Peter, sticking with you for a minute, what is the biggest concern or frustration that you've heard from customers or just peers in the industry regarding business resiliency?
We could spend a whole nother hour on this, right, Bonnie? I would say probably the biggest thing that I hear, and there's a lot of big things, is that they don't have buy-in from the top. And that makes it really hard to get resources for people to take you seriously. So, I mean, that's literally the thing I hear over and over and over. Now, how do you solve for that? That's why we could spend a whole hour talking about it. But Bonnie, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Peter, I find that absolutely mind-numbing to me. I mean, it's not that I'm disagreeing with you. I find that mind-numbing.
Yeah.
You hire me to do a job, then you don't give me the resources to do the job. I don't understand that, and I think that really starts with corporate culture. And then I really think that that's what I think we've been trying to talk about, is that it's a different ball game now, and if you don't address these issues, then you won't be in business. It's pretty much guaranteed. And so I think that the dialogue has to change. The fact that, I mean, if you don't mitigate against cyber threats, guess what? You won't have any data. So the idea of we can kind of skirt on our laurels, I think that time is over. And again, I think the pressure of all that's happened over these last 2 years have really kind of dictated a different tomorrow and a different day after tomorrow. So 2022, 2023, I think that organizations that don't lead on this are in deep, deep, deep trouble. That's and that is my opinion, and my opinion only.
I think smart organizations will probably move toward adding almost a C-level person, like a chief business resiliency officer or something like that, because that really elevates it to a level of importance, like a CEO, a CFO, a chief marketing officer. It's like you're really taking it seriously at that point, and you've got a seat at the table.
Agreed. And that was kind of a conversation that I had when I was at the ACP, was that, a lot of our members were that mid-level, SVP level, but they didn't really have an avenue up. And so this idea, and that was kind of something that we were talking a lot about, is how do we create a chief resilience officer? Because again, we have these conversations, is where I report into kind of dictates the resources that I get. So a CIO, again, CEO is like, I don't know what that is. Give them money, because they're using all these big terms. I don't even understand those words. Give them money. Or if you are under a C, right? I mean, you know what I mean? If you're under a COO, now you're stuck in process, because they're operations and their process. Or if they're in a CFO, now you're in finance. And so now the answer is no, because it's not my job to give you money. And so this idea is to have a resilience officer in there that can kind of, I don't want to say argue, but kind of add another leg to the stool to kind of advocate for the work that we do. And their job, or a risk officer or something like that, so looking at it from a different perspective. Again, we were talking about this 3 years ago at the ACP. I am a firm, absolutely categorically a believer in that.
Well, let me ask you this one, Bonnie. I think a lot of people will be interested to know this answer. What is the biggest or most common pitfall you've seen an organization encounter as they develop their business resilience plan?
I think it's getting caught in the weeds. I mean, more often than not, I chuckle at this, is that, again, people know this about me. I'm not a weeds person. Like, I don't know, I don't care, to make that problem go away. Someone else can do that. But I think a lot of times we want to really get as far down the rabbit hole as we possibly can. At some point, you just kind of have to say, okay, and move on. So I think a lot of times when people are starting the plan, it's the idea of the overwhelmingness of the plan, and then making this plan have to be something, super fantastic, huge, humongous. Look at the work I've done. It's 17 booklets, and there you go. Boom, here's our plan. And I think that people really, and when you're planning, people are arguing semantics on things. And I'm like, if, then, I don't know what word. Choose a word, let's agree on a word, and let's move on. So I think that's really, from a planner perspective, so I'm a planner, I'm not an engineer. No insult meant, my brother's an engineer. We have two different conversations, right? He wants to know this, I could care less, And so part of that is not to get lost in the minutia. While the minutia will kill you, I'm not saying it won't. That's where you're gonna trip. But in putting together a plan, the plan is not about minutia. The minutia goes into the SMEs or into those areas. The DR folks, they're more concerned about their minutia. As a BCP person, it's not my minutia. I want to put together a plan that's workable, that it can be followed, that people understand what they can do. So I mean, that's probably been the biggest conversations that I've been a part of. And again, you could just see my head going, why are we having this conversation? That has nothing to do with us. So I think, but again, I think that has been my personal experience of what I've, which I don't understand. I just don't.
Yeah. Well, we have time for one more question, and I do want you both to have an opportunity to mention some additional resources. So Bonnie, why don't you go first? Is there any place our audience can reference or things they can look at for business continuity and resilience?
I know you always tell me this, Katie. They can go to my website. They can do that. Please feel free to go to my website. Right, the resiliencyinstitute.com. Yeah, it's all spelled out. Feel free, do whatever you. I'm not here for that, right? I'm not here to market or sell myself. I'm here because I love the work we do, and I'm here to help in every which way. So again, that's what I'm here to do. So yeah, there's resources out there. I'm always, if anybody ever wants to have a conversation, they always know that I'm always good to talk. Not necessarily in this particular way, but I want to be an active part of this community. It's a community that I love. And so it has spent the last, 16 years in. And to what Peter had said, I crawfished into this, as we always say down here, which is I backed into this career after Katrina. So this was not my intended career by any stretch of the imagination. So anyway, feel free to reach out in any way. I would love to have a conversation.
That's because you were going to be an astronaut, right?
That's right. Yeah, something like that.
Has resources on that too.
Right.
So Peter, can you direct our folks anywhere for some additional info?
Absolutely. I mean, clearly our host today, DRJ, has some fantastic resources, but we do as well at alertmedia.com. Tons of guides, checklists, blog posts, and a lot of other free resources that you can access. I also encourage you, as Katie said earlier, to check out some of our podcast episodes on business resilience and continuity. The episodes with Bonnie, fantastic. Michelle from Charles Schwab, Keith from Boeing, Larry from SEC Wireless. I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, some great episodes to listen to. So please check that out.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, that is all the time that we have for questions today, but I did go ahead and include Bonnie and Peter's LinkedIn profile information here on the slide. So if you do want to make a connection or follow up with them after this, you are welcome to do so. And with that, Bonnie and Peter, thank you so much. I learned a ton today, so I hope our audience did as well. And we just really appreciate both of your time and expertise.